That's all I have to do. Hello, everyone. This is David from the Lawyers Committee. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I just want to, say hello to everyone and let you know that we'll be starting right at 9:30. So thank you so much for being on. So hello again, everyone. I want to welcome you to our webinar tonight. My name is David Graw, and I'm with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law in Washington, D.C. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Natasha Quiroga.
Hello, my name is Natasha Quiroga. I direct our Parental Readiness and Empowerment Program and Senior Counsel in the Educational Opportunities Project. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. And if you haven't already seen it, we have sort of a chat box going as well through Zoom. And so Natasha will be asking some questions throughout the presentation to sort of get a sense of what you're thinking and just get to know you all a little bit better.
And if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat box. We are in a meeting feature, so you are able to also raise your hand and unmute yourself if you do have a question. But you know, if we fail to see your chat message, but feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'll try and stop the presentation to answer questions.
Absolutely.
And before we begin, I think it would be helpful for us to get a sense of who is on. So if you could just type in the chat box, if you're a parent, an educator or administrator or a community advocate, that would give us a sense of who's participating tonight.
So a bit more about us. As I said, we're both with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law and its initiative PREP, which is the Parental Readiness and Empowerment Program. So the Lawyers Committee is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization formed in 1963 to combat racial discrimination and the resulting inequality of opportunity. And that work continues, of course, to be so vital today. So a bit more about me. Before attending law school and becoming an attorney, I taught elementary science at a public school in Prince George's County, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., to a really incredible group of 3rd and 4th graders. And so my students continue to inspire me today, and they're a big part of my commitment to providing an excellent education for all children.
And this is Natasha. I've been with the Lawyers Committee for about 7.5 years now, and before the Lawyers Committee, I ran an education and empowerment nonprofit for immigrant families, and then after that, I was at a education boutique law firm advising federal departments of education. But I came to this field because my mother is a public school teacher, and I spent a lot of time in her classroom working with ESL students. So that's why I'm committed to this work.
And just to give you a little bit of information about PREP, which, as Natasha said, she's the director of. PREP, again, it's a Parental Readiness and Empowerment Program. And so the purpose of PREP is to improve student performance, retention, and access to equal educational opportunities. So through that program, we work to help parents become more involved with their children's education. So we provide parent advocacy guides, workshops, educational consultation clinics, along with webinars such as this and video tutorials. And we also work to ensure that parents have the tools to advocate for their children, so they'll have access to a quality education and greater educational opportunity. So included on this slide, as you can see with the links, are a few of our resources. So it's a good time to mention that we're going to be sharing this presentation with you afterwards, so that you can look through it again as needed and access the various links and resources that we've included. So we've created this presentation specifically for you. And so to give you a sense of where we're going, we're going to first provide a quick overview of special education law. Then we're going to turn to some background information on what is an IEP and what should be included. It's going to be followed with some information and advocacy tips on the IEP process, then a review of parental rights in special education, and then finally we'll share some additional resources that we found to be helpful for parents. I'm just going to take a quick pause here and try to figure out what those green lines are on the presentation. Sorry about that, everyone. Just my screen, it looks like.
It might be.
That is odd. Apologies again, everyone. So let's just do this.
So while David's fixing the screen, I do want to share also that we have another webinar scheduled for next Wednesday that will focus on Andrew F., the recent Supreme Court case. and we'll be sharing some information on the tools for parents and advocates and what NJF means for advocates. And that'll be hosted by the Lawyers Committee as well as our friends at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health.
Thank you, Tasha. So it seems like we solved that. Sorry again for that. I'm not sure what that was. So again, we'll be starting with a quick overview of special education law. So there are two main sets of laws that apply to students with disabilities, federal and state law. On the federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, commonly referred to as the IDEA or sometimes the IDEA, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1974 are the two major federal statutes. So the IDEA, provides the most comprehensive legal framework for delivering special education to children with qualifying disabilities. IDEA requires each state to develop rules on delivering special education sources consistent with its provisions. To this end, California passed its own laws, which generally parallel IDEA, which include in the California Education Code and the California Code of Regulations, and there are some citations there. So the IDEA provides most of the coverage for children with disabilities. It provides all eligible children with disabilities ages 3 through high school graduation, or until age 22, the right to receive a free, appropriate public education, commonly referred to as a FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, or an LRE. And these laws contain procedural safeguards that govern the identification, assessment, and placement of children. These laws create very specific procedures for how parents should complain about their schools when they think the school is doing something wrong. The IDEA covers a number of disabilities, including those specifically listed here. We're not going to go through all of them, of course, but I'd specifically flag the autism spectrum disorder and other health disabilities, such as ADHD or ADD, for our conversation today. And so if your child's disability is not on the list, he or she might be eligible for special education, or she might not be eligible for special education under IDEA. However, that student may be eligible for a plan under Section 504, not the IDEA. So for example, if your child has severe allergies, diabetes, asthma, or ADHD, all of which require special attention throughout the day, but don't actually hurt academic performance, your child may be able to be eligible for a 504 plan to address his or her needs and will be protected from discrimination based on his or her disability. So also significant about Section 504 is that second part, that it protects all school-age students with disabilities from discrimination. So just to quickly comment on some significant legal developments on the special education front, particularly those driven by Andrew F., the Supreme Court case that Natasha mentioned from 2017. And that helped clarify the meaning of FAPE for students with disabilities. We're just going to include a few select quotes from that decision. And of course, if you're much more interested, you can listen to Natasha's webinar. She'll delve much deeper into it. So a few important pullouts are that the IEP goals must be aligned with grade level content standards for all children with disabilities. That if a child is not making expected progress towards his or her annual goals, the IEP team must revise as appropriate the IEP to address the lack of progress. And then that this fact-intensive exercise will be informed not only by the expertise of school officials, but also by the input of the child's parents or guardians. So the school must get parent input when determining if the IEP will help your child make progress. But it's not just passive. You have the right to be involved and to give your opinion on whether the IEP is appropriate for your child. So then what is an IEP and what's contained within it? The IEP is a written document outlining the student's strengths, needs, and educational goals. The IEP must be tailored to the individual student's needs. Ultimately, the IEP is designed to help students with a disability reach educational goals more easily than they otherwise would. The IEP must help teachers and related service providers understand the student's disability and how the disability affects the student's learning process. The IEP is a legally binding document, so be aware that each state has separate guidelines for how the interpretation and implementation of IEPs. Before an IEP can be written, your child must be eligible for special education. Perfect. So then what's actually contained in an IEP? As you can see, an IEP contains a number of things. including the child's current levels of academic performance, their measurable annual goals and objectives, special education supports and services, including the beginning date, the anticipated frequency, location, and duration of services, as well as a description of the child's interests and abilities, a behavioral support intervention plan, if needed, a transition plan, which is required at age, say, 16, and then extended school year services if the child qualifies. There's also, of course, a signature page. So beyond that shorter list that we just shared, is this much more expanded list of all the different pieces of information that can be included in an IEP. Many of them don't apply to all children, but it's worth reviewing this list on your own to see if there's anything that should be included in your child's IEP that isn't. Again, we're not going to review this list in its entirety, but as I mentioned before, I'll be sharing a copy of this presentation with you all after we're done. So you can review it, print it out, make sure that everything that should be in your child's IEP is included. So of the items that should be included, and of particular significance for students on the spectrum, is a description of the least restrictive environment that a student will be placed in. So according to special education law, students with disabilities should be educated in the general classroom to the maximum extent appropriate, even if it requires supplementary aids and services. And a child should be removed from the regular classroom only if aids and services will not be enough because of the severity of the disability. Even if your child is separated in some classes, he or she should be put back into the general education classroom when possible. Each public school must ensure that a continuum of alternative placements is available to meet the needs of children with disabilities for special education and related services. On the continuum of supports for special education students are many different kinds of classrooms and levels of support. 5 of the most common of which are shown here, ranging from the least restrictive or the lowest level support on the left to the most restrictive and the highest level of support on the right. So the least restrictive would be just a general education classroom with no special education support. And then getting more restrictive, we have a general education classroom with special education support, perhaps from a special educator or class that's co-taught by a special education teacher. Sort of in the middle is a separate special education classroom that has push into general ed. And then even more restrictive is a separate classroom specifically for special education students. And then finally, the most restrictive is a separate school for students with specific needs. I also want to touch on some of the related services that special education students can receive. An appropriate education is determined on an individualized basis for the student. It's not broadly considered by the disability. As a result, any of the services on this list could be necessary to provide an appropriate education, including occupational or physical therapy, rehabilitation counseling, or speech pathology. And of course, these services must be written into the IEP. A quick word on special education services. So states and LEAs, or local education agencies, which are generally school districts, all have the obligation to provide children with special needs the full continuum of services they need to access a meaningful education. So districts use different methods to ensure this full continuum of services is provided, which sometimes requires entering relationships with other districts or servicers. In California, districts participate in what is called a SELPA, a special education local plan area, quite the mouthful, or more plainly, it's a region which oversees a comprehensive service delivery system for all participating districts and schools. A region may be a group of many small districts or a large single district, but each region must be of sufficient size and scope to provide the full continuum of services for children and youth residing within the region boundaries. For PEP parents in Solano County, the Solano is named, conveniently enough, the Solano County SELPA. And information on that group can be found online at the website we have there. There's also the Vallejo City USD SELPA for students within that school district. So what qualifies for an IEP? The IDEA creates specific rights for children with disabilities to support the child's success in school. Under the IDEA, students with a disability are entitled to receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. This is accompanied by developing an IEP. To be eligible for an IEP, your child must be between the ages of 3 and 21, have an identified disability that impedes learning to the point that the child needs specialized instruction in order to close the gap between the child's own academic achievement and that of his or her age peers. So throughout this presentation, we've also included some pop quiz questions to review what we've gone over and bring you all a bit more into this presentation. So the first question over there with the orange background. So a child with an IDEA listed disability is automatically eligible for special education. True or false? So the answer is false. An assessment must be conducted to determine eligibility and whether the disability actually impacts academic performance. However, all school-age students with disabilities are protected from discrimination under Section 504. And then with the blue background, Rebecca has ADHD, and her mother would like to get special education services because her disability is interfering with her studies. The district has found that most students with ADHD usually do not need accommodations and perform perfectly well without the benefit of services. As such, the district does not consider ADHD to be a severe enough disability to authorize an IEP. Is this allowed?
If you want to type into the group chat box what you think the answer is, if it's yes, if you think yes, it's allowed, or no, it is not allowed. And we'll give you some time to type in your answer. Do we have any answers? Okay, so we got a couple answers, yeah, that are no.
Excellent. So no. So students with IDEA listed disabilities must be referred and assessed. So if the child's disability does not interfere with his or her ability to learn, the child will not be eligible for special education services. Well done, everyone. Perfect. So the IDEA calls for a team of individuals, including parents and school personnel, to work together to develop an IEP for a child who qualifies for special education services. Your child's IEP team must include the parent, and that may also be a guardian, a long-term foster parent, or a surrogate parent, the student, if it's appropriate based on their age, the general education teacher of the child, if the child participates or may participate in regular education, a special education teacher of the child or provider, a school district representative, and then others with special knowledge of the child or to help with specific aspects of the IEP, such as transition specialists or those who can help interpret evaluation results. And so because IEP decisions are made by a team rather than by one individual, it's important and helpful to understand the role of each member. And so while each person brings a different set of skills, experiences, concerns to the table, you can expect that they will all share a common goal, which is enabling the child to succeed in school and in life. And the IEP team may, of course, include other people invited by the school or by parents. And so to further flesh this out, we also have a resource that we'll share at the end that lays out, again, all of these people and their specific roles on the IEP team. So before the IEP meeting, so there are several things that you can do before the meeting to prepare. A parent can visit their child's classroom, review their child's records, ask who's going to be at the meeting, gather any reports you may have from outside therapists, tutors, consultants, or doctors. You can request a translator if you need one in your native language. You can take someone with you to serve as your support system. You can write down the important points you want to make about your child, so you make sure that you remember those and you get those out during the meeting. And then, of course, you should also make a list of your child's strengths and talents. Gotta remember those, so you can share those during the meeting. And then during the actual meeting, the different members of the IEP team share their thoughts and suggestions. So if this is the first IEP meeting after the child's evaluation, the team may go over their evaluation results, so the child's strengths and needs will be clear. These results will help the team decide what special help the child needs from school. So after introductions to the meeting, of course, be sure to take notes and make sure that someone else also takes accurate notes. You would ask questions if you don't understand the terms being used. You want to know what happens next by asking what is next in the specific process that's going on. You're going to read everything that you're asked to sign, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. And then if necessary, you want to meet with individuals after the meeting to review their statements or reports. It's important that the IEP meeting focus on your child as an individual. If it seems like the team is proposing one-size-fits-all strategies, remind them that the IEP should focus on your child's individual strengths and needs. If you don't understand something or need clarification, speak up. This is the best chance to communicate with the entire IEP team. To comment briefly on signing the IEP. First, remember that the IEP is a legally binding document, so you should approach signing it as you would any other legal document. And then before consenting or agreeing to sign, you would make sure you ask for copies of the IEP and any other relevant documents. You can also request a copy in your native language, and you would make sure that you take it home for a very careful review before signing. You also should know that parents can agree to parts of an IEP, that those portions will be implemented, but they can then attach what are called parent exceptions to the IEP that outline their disagreements. And this system of partial consent is very important because services cannot begin until a parent gives their consent. And then after the IEP meeting, you need to take additional steps. These include reviewing and returning the signed IEP if you agree with its terms. If you disagree with it or with portions of it, you want to provide your objections in writing to the IEP team in an email or a letter that summarizes what decisions and questions came out of the meeting that you disagree with. And then of course you should talk to your child. If the child did not attend the IEP meeting, you want to make sure that you share how it went. You want to mention the positive things that people said along with the challenges. And of course, you should consider your child's age and maturity as you explain much of this. If your child joined the meeting, of course, feel free to ask them how they feel about this. Of course, you want to develop a collaborative relationship with the teachers and service providers. You want to keep important documents. So place the new IEP as well as the notes and documentation in your files in a safe place. And then finally, you want to note any important dates, such as progress reports or other things that are set on your calendar. To talk quickly about an annual review of the IEP. So an IEP should be reviewed at least once per year, and this is called the annual review, unless, of course, the IEP team decides it's not necessary. So during the annual review, the IEP team should review progress on previous goals. It should report present levels of performance, identify current needs, and then revise or update goals accordingly. This is very important. A parent can request a review at any time. You do not need to wait for the school to schedule one. And then once you've requested one, the meeting should be held within 30 days of your written request. And then at least once every 3 years, the student should be evaluated in all areas of the suspected disability during a reassessment. This can be waived if the entire IEP team, and that includes the parent, decides that reassessment is not needed. While only required once every 3 years, the parent can request a reassessment more frequently, with the limitation that reassessments may only occur no more than once a year, unless the IEP team otherwise agrees. Excellent, so we're back to another pop quiz. So the question on the left side with the orange background. So parents must sign the IEP at the end of the IEP meeting.
True or false? Why don't you, if you can type that into the chat box and let us know if you think that's true or false.
False. So as I've said, and as I've really tried to stress, you can absolutely take the time to review the IEP. Don't let anyone pressure you to sign the document before you're ready. And then the second question on the right side. So who must be included in your child's IEP team? A parent or the student, if the student's age 18 or older. B, a school district representative qualified to teach or supervise special education, knows about the general ed curriculum and knows about the resources of the school district. C, at least one of your child's special education teachers will be responsible for implementing the IEP. D, at least one of your child's regular education teachers, if your child participates or may participate in the regular education environment. E, a person who's qualified to interpret the evaluation results and their educational implications. And F, all of the above.
All right. Getting a lot of answers already.
Perfect. Great. Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry, so as I believe many of you got correct, the answer was F, all of the above. These people must be included in your child's IEP team. Other people certainly can be invited, but these are the people who must be there. And so let's quickly talk about a review of parents' rights in special education. So parents have the right to attend all meetings about your child at a mutually agreed upon time and place with an idea of who is attending. They have a right to see all of your child's records about his identification, evaluation, and educational placement, and the provision of FAPE, which is a free, appropriate public education. They have the right to consent to any evaluation, related service, or general action taken towards their child. They have the right to receive notice whenever the district wants a change or refuses to change the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of their child. And then quickly on parent involvement and teamwork that I have on the right side there. So teachers and school staff can give very, very valuable information about child's academic performance, but you and your family are often the best providers of information about your child's daily activities, their interests, their preferences, instructional needs, and their past history, so things like their health issues. And many of these are unknown to IEP team members. So you not only can be part of the IE team, but you should be. You are absolutely, I would say, the most important part of the IEP team. Another pop quiz. So on the left, with an orange background, the district decided your child no longer needs one of the services in the IEP. The district decides to end the service. Can the district do so in spite of the parent's objection? Yes or no? You can answer in the chat box. Great. So I had a little fun with the animation. Sorry about that, guys. So the answer is no. The district must give you written notice of a proposal to change any aspect of your child's IEP or placement. So you can object in writing, which may initiate a due process hearing, and then changes cannot take place until the hearing officer has issued a decision agreeing with the proposed change. The child will stay put and continue to receive his or her IEP services until the parent consents to the change or after the due process hearing. And then the question on the top right in blue. So a student should never be present at the IEP meeting because it is the sole responsibility of the administration to decide what goes into the plan. True or false? Take a second to answer the question. So, yeah, I had too much fun with these animations. False. So when appropriate, students should attend IEP meetings and are encouraged to give their input. They can often be a very, very important part of the process. And then the bottom right, so IEPs are generally reviewed once per year. However, if changes need to be made, reviews can be requested up to how many times? 3, 5, or as many times as needed. And the answer is C, as many times as needed. Excellent. So we now want to take a second and share some additional resources that we pulled out, or that we've created, and that we wanted to highlight for all of you. And again, I would stress that we're going to share this PowerPoint with you. So I've included all these links to be very helpful when you look back through it, or if you remember that you want to look at something. I think you actually may be able to click on some of these, and access them now, but certainly feel no need.
Can you click on it and open them?
Absolutely. So we've created a number of these to share with you all to help you all going forward. So the first one is preparing for your child's IEP meeting. It's a handout of preparing your child's preparing for the meeting, and has some important questions to think about ahead of time. So
And if we have time, we can actually go through these questions one by one so that you can be thinking about this as well. But we'll continue right now with the rest of the resources, but it's just a quick handout that you have access to as well.
Absolutely. Excellent. Then we also have the Prep California Special Education Guide, which compiles a number of very important questions and answers specifically pertaining to special education in California.
And we actually, I forgot to ask the question at the beginning, what states and cities everybody is from. So if you want to type that into your chat box, we initially planned for this webinar for California parents and educators, but we do have special education guides for all 50 states as well. So if you want to just type in quickly, you're into the box where you are from, that would be helpful. But we do have a resource map for all 50 states.
Yeah, we can look at that now. Very lovely map. Yeah, the California guide.
So it's presented in an FAQ format that goes, and it is state specific. So it doesn't go into your district's information. But this gives you a good sense of just at least the state law initially. And if you go to resources or get prep, actually, it should pop up with the map.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is where I found the California guide. I clicked on California, found it right there. Very nice. Perfect.
So it looks like most folks are from Vacaville or Belmont up in Northern California.
Great.
So that's good. But we do have resources for other states too.
We also have several videos that we've created on our YouTube channel that delve much deeper into California education law, for those of you who are there, as well as other issues.
Yeah, there we have approximately 8 videos on special education on our YouTube channel. One is a very basic overview of special education, the very specific steps of the process, so a little bit more in depth than what we're covering tonight. And then the other one is there's about 4 videos on different topics, so like the overlap of discipline for special education students, talking a little bit more about the IEP and that sort of thing. So those videos are also on our YouTube channel, and they're also available in Spanish too.
That's actually a great reminder, Natasha. Many of these resources are available in Spanish. Yes. And then next we have, we briefly mentioned Andrew F. and mentioned that Natasha's hosting a webinar. We'll delve much deeper into it. And there's a great talking points handout that, that pulls text from the Supreme Court case, as well as a guidance document put out by the U.S. Department of Education that sort of explains how the court case will actually influence special education law. It's very interesting. And then finally is the handout I mentioned earlier with a brief description of the role of each member of the IEP team. So to answer more specific questions going forward, we would really strongly encourage you to take advantage of PrEP's free consultations on education issues. So you can receive help and advice from a volunteer lawyer on issues relating to special education, school discipline, English learners, bullying, or discrimination by calling the number that's listed here, by sending us an email, or by scheduling an appointment. And we would absolutely encourage you to reach out with questions or concerns.
And this is a free service that's provided for all parents. We find this is particularly useful for parents who have children in special education or trying to figure out if their child needs special education services. So we have a number of trained volunteer lawyers in the state of California who are ready to answer your questions. This is not a representation, so they're not able to attend an IEP meeting with you or go to a due process hearing with you, but they can provide legal information and advice and help you develop an action plan with very concrete next steps that you can then take to implement on your own. And the service is completely free. So, you know, whether or not you're able to use the service or if you want to share it with your friends and your neighbors, that would be great because we have a service available. We have interpreters as well, but please take advantage of this service.
And then again is the webinar on Andrew F. that we've already discussed. titled the Andrew F. Decision, a tool for special education advocacy. Just to remind you of the date and time, it's April 11th at 3 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Central, or 6 p.m. Where we are here in Washington, D.C. And you can register with that same URL that you registered, many of you did, thankfully, for this webinar today.
So we want to go through, actually, so before we continue with this, does anybody have questions about any of the information that we've covered or any of the resources we shared? Feel free to type it in the chat box or like raise your hand if you want to just speak into your microphone and have that ability. So while you're thinking about your questions, David's going to be pulling up the Preparing for Your Child's IEP meeting handout that we've developed, and we're going to go through it together to start helping you all think about ways to better prepare for your child's IEP meeting. And so I know a lot of you said you're parents. If you're an advocate, this is a good forum to walk through with the parents that you work with as well, to start just thinking about really key important information that can be shared at the IEP meeting that you can perhaps may have not thought about before or have it put it down on one piece of paper.
Yeah, I find it's really important to, as we mentioned, to sort of take notes and to think about the most important things that you want to mention beforehand. Oftentimes, the meeting goes one direction and you want it to go a different direction, so it's really important to make sure that you're grounded in the key points that you want to bring. And so doing an activity like this ahead of time, writing these things down, taking great notes is really helpful to going from the result that you want to getting that result for yourself and for your child.
So the first question we have here is really thinking about what your child's strengths are and then also weaknesses. We often like to say challenges rather than weaknesses, but focusing on what they're good at, whether it's they are really enthusiastic about learning, enthusiastic about going to school, or they're a very strong communicator, and then challenges that they might have. They might have trouble paying attention because they have ADHD. They might have trouble with their language skills because they have a speech impediment, or whatever disability they might have might impact the challenges that they have. So thinking about strengths and challenges that aren't just impacting their learning, but also their ability to socialize within their classroom or within the school too. So just thinking through those things, and then moving on to their likes, what the dislikes are, moods, and emotions. And this is important because when the child is first being evaluated, this doesn't always come out in an assessment. So your contribution here is really valuable. If the IEP team is suggesting some form of service that your child is just not going to like, then that's important to note here and to put it down, as well as like what makes them react or have different impacts to their moods as well. And then the next question will be, what questions or concerns do you have about your child's success? So when we developed this particular form, it was really prior to, I guess, for the first IEP meeting after the child has been assessed. But even if your child already has an IEP and is currently receiving services, it's still important to continually think about the questions or concerns you have about your child's ongoing success. So, whether or not meeting their IEP goals each year, each semester, you might want to make sure and write down what concerns you have, whether or not they're able to reach those goals, but also academic goals or social goals too. And then looking at the IEP itself. So this might be, either the first time you've looked at the IEP or you already have one, it's been implemented before. You might want to take another look at it and think about how it's now meeting your child's specific needs related to their language needs, whether it's, the child is English as a second language, or English language learner, or they need speech therapy, to communication needs if they're struggling with verbal communication, as well as behavioral and emotional needs too. So whether or not the IEP is actually meeting the child's needs, and then looking into physical education needs, special equipment needs, and then other needs that your child may have too. So those are some, this is a very useful exercise that has been helpful for thinking through preparing for the IEP meeting prior to it happening, that you can incorporate by looking at your child's IEP. And then we also created another document that I can share. So I don't think, David, you have this one on your computer. Let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. Oh, here's that one.
apologies to everyone. It seems like we've been on mute or at least I have since I started sharing my screen. So I'm not sure how much of that got through, but I'd say about this slide something that we do appreciate so much, all of you joining us, and that we have an evaluation slide for all of you. Our program is actually being evaluated by some PhD students at SMU at Southern Methodist University. So there are a few questions there that we'll go over our presentation today. I can ask you about different topics that you were interested in going forward. So we really appreciate all the feedback that you're able to give us through that.
Yeah, and we will be sharing all this information with you and recording the webinar too, and so we can share that and will be sent out via email to you. But thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you tune in to our webinar next Wednesday on Andrea.
Yeah, thank you everyone.